All right. So for our next session, we wanted to provide an overview of the last 10 years, the last decade of the Southeastern Caribbean Disaster Resilience Partnership, with it being our 10-year anniversary. We would be remiss not to look back at the last 10 years and take a moment to reflect and celebrate how we've grown, and look towards the future as well about how we can continue to contribute to regional resilience. So joining me are people who have been involved with SCDRP at many different stages of its development, from the beginning to today. So I'd like to welcome Debra Hernandez, the Executive Director of SCDRP, Lindy Betzhold, National Coastal Resilience Fund Program Lead, NOAA Office for Coastal Management, Randall Mathews, Deputy Director of Chatham County Emergency Management Agency, Geno Olmi, who is now retired, but we still rope him in to plenty of SCDRP things, formerly the coordinator for the NOAA Southeast and Caribbean Regional Team, and Subhashi I'm sorry, Subhashi, I practice this, I promise. Karunarathne. I did practice, and now that I'm in front of people, of course, I forget how to read. So, and Subhashi is an urban planner with the Chatham County Savannah Metropolitan Planning Commission. So first, I just want to start off with a little snapshot quickly of where we are right now, before I ask our panelists to share a little bit more about our history. So SCDRP's vision is that communities across the Southeast and the Caribbean will be safer, stronger, and more resilient to extreme weather, compound events, and the chronic and episodic impacts of a changing climate. So to do that, we serve as a hub for regional collaboration, serving the people who are on the ground in communities across the region, addressing these complex challenges. We do that with information, opportunities, and most importantly, with connections to other people in the field across sectors and across state and territory lines. SCDRP is constantly evolving, as you'll hear in a minute, to meet the needs and challenges of the people it serves. So today, we hold monthly webinars, we produce a regular newsletter, we host a job board, a funding opportunity webpage, we hold annual meetings, of course, as well as other convenings, and hold a mentorship program. So I want to talk just a little bit about a couple of the things that we have going on right now, specifically our mentorship program, because that's a newer initiative. It was created in 2024 to strengthen the resilience workforce by supporting students and early career professionals entering the field of resilience planning, as well as disaster preparedness, response, or recovery in the region, as well as sustainability. In 2025, because of a connection formed at the SCDRP 9th annual meeting, SCDRP partnered with RCE, which is Regional Center of Expertise of Education for Sustainable Development, RCE, Greater Atlanta, on what we are now calling the GROW Mentorship Program. So this connects students and early career professionals with experienced practitioners in the field, emergency management, resilience planning, sustainability, and we give opportunities for one-on-one mentoring and professional development. I know we have, maybe raise your hand if you're a part of the mentorship program. Got a lot of people in here. Yeah. So it's the only one of its kind in the region. And by partnering with another network, RCE Greater Atlanta, we've been able to leverage the wealth of experience in both networks, and our participation has nearly tripled from year 1 to year 2. So we started with about 24 participants, and now we're around 65 participants. So another way that SCDRP is working to meet the moment, as funding landscapes and traditional structures of federal support shift, SCDRP is recognizing that now more than ever we need collaboration, creative thinking, and active strategizing. So we pursued and received grant funding this year from the CO2 Foundation, and it's supporting not only this meeting, but also it helped us to invite local emergency managers serving communities across the Southeast and Caribbean. So immediately following this meeting, we will be hosting an invitation-only roundtable facilitated by AG Witt, and emergency managers will have the opportunity to strategize along multi-sector partners and create actionable frameworks to close capacity gaps and funding gaps through these multi-sector, non-traditional partnerships. So, sticking with that theme of collaboration. So the discussions at this roundtable will produce an action plan, so we are excited to share that with you after the fact. So now that you have a little bit of a snapshot of where we're at, we are going to dive into the origins of SCDRP and how we've evolved to serve the region. So my first question is for Lindy. Well, actually, and maybe when you answer your question first, maybe you can share a little bit about your connection to SCDRP. And then we'd love to hear, looking back at the origins of what used to be the Southeast Disaster Recovery Partnership, what was its original purpose and what gaps or needs was it created to address at the time that it was formed?
Thank you. What an exciting retrospective to be able to look back at a decade of hard work of this partnership. My name is Lindy Betzhold, and I've served various roles throughout the history of the SCDRP, including interim executive director, chair of the advisory board, project officer for the original project. So I've seen it move through the entirety of its metamorphosis and couldn't be more proud of the new developments that continue to happen and innovative partnerships that we get to see at these convenings and offline, and at our monthly meetings as well. So the Southeast Disaster Recovery Partnership was actually born of a meeting of governors. Actually, they were trying to get together of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, and they were trying to figure out what priorities they could all agree on and work together on. And as we heard from Mayor Cogswell and Dwayne DeFries and other folks in our presentations today, hazards are a giant influence here in the Southeast, and that was one thing that they could agree on, the building the capacity for disaster recovery, both in the public sector as well as the private sector. So this kind of high-level agreement that this is a need allowed them to mobilize their emergency management folks as well as their coastal zone management programs to start talking about what might be possible. These groups got together and put in an application to the NOAA. At the time it was called the Coastal Services Center, had a coastal resilience grant program that focused on just that, building coastal resilience in regions and helping to increase the capacity of states and municipalities, localities, and regions to weather the storm literally and figuratively. So in 2016, this group worked to put together a three-pronged proposal. One was each state worked on a local or state priority regarding recovery, and each state decided what their own priority was, and they worked on that. They worked on that in the capacity of their group, and then they worked to enhance the capacity and relationships to engage the private sector in disaster recovery, recognizing that there's a wealth of expertise and capacity in the private sector that wasn't as connected as it could be to enable effective recovery from these episodic hazards. And also to build a regional network of disaster recovery professionals. So this project, these three prongs, formed the basis of the Southeast Disaster Recovery Partnership. So these funded projects move forward in South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, and Florida. And it also funded 3 regional forums, which were the first 3 of the predecessors of this meeting that we have today. And the projects were completed, but one of the coolest things that came out of it is it succeeded in building a network that allowed for connections across a lot of stovepiped agencies and public-private and nonprofit and academia, and really pulled in all of these different entities and leveraged their expertise like we see happening today. It was new and different for this area, and we saw it bear fruit in a lot of ways. Some of the things that happened there were to host the annual meeting focused on actionable exchange on recovery and resilience, white papers, and obviously facilitating through the website and webinars and listservs and things along those lines. But in the process, built, and we still see this partnership building, a diverse network of public and private NGO and academia. And it not only filled that need, but as the conversation developed, the recovery piece turned not only to immediate recovery, but our timeline ended up looking a little bit further to adaptation. So once we recover, how do we do it better? How do we adapt to the circumstances so we don't have quite as much to build back from the next go round? And the diversity of partners you see today on our advisory board and today in this room. And it's really exciting to see the evolution up to it was 2016, and that takes us to about 2019. And then I'll let Geno take over here in a minute.
Yeah, thank you, Lindy. And yes, Geno, can you start with just sharing your connection to SCDRP and then talking a little bit about the Southeast Climate Community of Practice and that merger and how that strengthened SCDRP as a network?
Sure. Thanks, Claire. So I'm going to step back just a little bit earlier. In 2009, colleagues on the Gulf Coast started the Gulf of Mexico Climate Community of Practice, and a few of us got together and thought, well, that sounds like something valuable. We were all beginning to have this conversation about climate change. How do we discuss it? What do we do with it? How do we plan for it? And so we started in 2010 the Southeastern Caribbean Climate Community of Practice. And it was really just a forum to bring people together to discuss climate change communication and climate change planning. And I think some folks in the room were, Jennifer, I know, was involved in that way on back, and others as well. And it really was just this forum for having a conversation. How do we learn from each other? Who are you talking to? How is that going? Are there different messages that work or don't work for that? And the people that we brought together was really largely the scientists, outreach specialists, and state and local planners and administrators. And where we were noticeably absent, one of the places that the Recovery Partnership did really well, I think, is on the private sector, bringing private sector in. We were much more focused really on kind of Sea Grant and Estuarine Research Reserve outreach specialists and their conversations with the communities about climate change. And so that was really where our conversation was. And then kind of 2015, 2018 came with the 2015 floods in North Carolina and South Carolina, Hurricane Matthew in 16, Irma in 17, Maria in 17, hitting our region. Just as the Recovery Partnership found themselves talking more about long-term changes, we found ourselves could not avoid the conversation about short-term events and how do we plan for these events as well as kind of long-term climate change. And so I think while these two groups were at that point kind of in parallel, I think we were gradually kind of merging together just from the realization that to talk about recovery, you got to talk about planning, talk about events, planning for events. You need to talk about the long-term changes that are happening that influence the number and severity of those events. And so that conversation was beginning to happen, and we held our last annual Climate Community of Practice meeting in 2019 and began conversations of the two boards about that time, the two board of directors or steering committees. and in 2020 officially became the Southeastern Caribbean Disaster Resilience Partnership, so the entity that it is today. And it was it wasn't a hostile takeover, it was a very cordial merger, I think. One advantage of kind of grouping with the Recovery Partnership is they actually had money. We were pretty much a volunteer organization. We had some funding through the University of South Carolina for a part-time coordinator. But it was a really good fit. And I think the strength of the new partnership at the time was that it incorporated the kind of full range from disaster resilience planning, response, recovery across not only event scales but long-term climate change scales. And I think that was the real strength, because it's really, I think as we all know now, you really can't have those conversations independently. They really are part of a spectrum of how do we deal with this stuff, right? And then the other kind of, I think, advantage that came out of that was the inclusion of the Caribbean. The partnership originally wasn't Caribbean focused. The community of practice was, and so we brought in the Caribbean folks as well into the new partnership. And so, so I've been kind of involved from the beginning, although not the beginning with the Recovery Partnership. I did, once we merged these two groups, served on the board for a number of years. And that's all I have to say.
That's great. Thank you, Geno. Lindy, can you talk a little bit more about the expansion to include the Caribbean and how incorporating Caribbean partners has enriched the partnership?
Absolutely. As you heard a few times, the hurricanes of 2017, Irma and Maria, were a catalyst for a number of folks in the room's careers to take a shift. And this was actually along with joining with the Southeast Climate Community of Practice, which included the Caribbean. It was a good opportunity for us to reach out to the Caribbean, who both can benefit from the wealth of resources of the SDRP, and also brings decades and hundreds of years of weathering these difficult community coastal hazards and hurricanes, and recovering, and have their own lessons learned to share as well. So while we enrich the partnership by expanding the table, so to speak, in the climate adaptation, climate science, and all the benefits that CCOP brings to the table, we also expanded the table so that we could increase the amount of sharing and exchange and dialogue and peer learning that can happen between the southeastern states and the Caribbean territories as well. And in 2017, and our hearts were going out to our territories in the Caribbean and wanted to help in any way possible. So leveraging what expertise we could, and providing resources that may help in recovery. And building long-term resilience was the goal there, and looking to strengthen those partnerships across time. And when we expanded this table, it took a bit of navel gazing, so to speak, to really figure out, like, okay, now that we have more people at the table, does it look the same? Does it feel the same? Are there other things that we want to accomplish or set goals? And so we tried to put forth a very strong vision and set of goals for this partnership, so that we could remain focused on the things that we thought could serve this community the best, which are looking at communities that are more resilient to environmental change, natural hazards, and disasters, in order to lessen the intensity, duration, and disruption to society. So that was like our baseline, that's our vision, and the ways that we wanted to do this was to strengthen community resilience, support rapid disaster recovery, and for the partnership to serve as the primary network for professionals in emergency management, climate adaptation, and disaster recovery in the Southeastern Caribbean. So that was our big, bold mission, and it's been super exciting to see it play out over the last number of years.
Thank you. And Debra, you're up next. Can you first of all share kind of at what stage you were involved with SCDRP, which was the very beginning, I believe. But
some of us are old.
maybe share a little bit about how you first connected with SCDRP, and then I'd love to hear a little bit more about how it's evolved just in the last couple of years, and specifically how SCDRP's mission connects with the Socorro mission, which we did hear about earlier.
Thanks. What y'all might not have heard is some of us are old, and we've been doing this a long time. Socorro is a mission-driven organization, but we're a creature of federal legislation. And the purpose of the federal program that we're part of is to serve society. Now, we're focused on the weather and response and getting the data and information that people need to live and work in coastal areas. But without the society part, it doesn't make much sense to collect data and information. So managers, people working in the resilient space, people working in communities have always been a primary stakeholder for Socorro. So we engaged with the Governor's Alliance that has been referred to as the origins of SCDRP. And while there was agreement on major issues that we needed to work on in the Southeast, there wasn't sustained support at the governor's level for an organization to coordinate among the states. So as the governors were stepping back, funding was becoming available, and the short answer to why Socorro got so involved is somebody needed to be the banker. And so we served as the fiscal agent for the original grants that got the organization moving forward. And so since then, we've been engaged primarily as that support system. Y'all are the experts in the room. I'm a civil engineer by training, and we had originally, and we've just recently been making this shift, been what we thought were good regional partners helping to incubate the partnership so that they could stand alone and be all they needed to be in the world. And our thinking has shifted very recently to a position where Socorro has a number of programs that we're involved in, and we're most known for our monitoring, our technology, and our ocean science work. But again, if you're not reaching people with data and information so that they can make improvements on the ground, there's not much use for the other part of it. So we think of SCDRP as a program of Socorro these days, and I'm happy to say the board's in agreement with that thinking on how the mission of Socorro and the mission of SCDRP align.
Thank you, Debra. So now I want to take it to more present day SCDRP and pass it over to Subhashi to first of all share your connection to SCDRP, but also you've sharing a little bit about what inspired you personally to enter the field of resilience and how mentorship specifically has been helpful in your career path.
Thank you, Claire, and I thank you for trying my name. It's a long one. So my connection to SCDRP is through the Grow Mentorship Program. Before I get into that, I will tell you why I am interested in resilience planning. I'm trained as a geologist back in my home country. I used to, for a very short period, work in landslide hazard investigations, and during that time I got into grant writing for more resilient related work. I didn't know it was resilience management or planning back in the day. I was like, oh, I like this. This is something I can be happy doing, and it is a little bit rewarding than just going out in the field and looking at rocks. So that's how I got into planning, and I wanted to explore more, and that's why I came to the US from Sri Lanka. And right now, in my urban planning career at Chatham County, Savannah, Metropolitan Planning Commission, which is local government, I deal a lot with zoning ordinances and development reviews every day, and trying to give recommendations to elected officials to make the right choices, which is very difficult in my little experience. And I started to get lost in the way of like, am I doing the right thing? This is shifting a little bit from what I wanted to do in resilience planning. It's getting far away, and I started to get lost. And one of my dear friends, who was a GROW mentee and was part of this program last year, mentioned about this program. The exact words she used was, she came back from the 9th annual meeting, and she told me, I found my people. They understand what I'm saying. They speak my language. That was what she used to explain this community, and I knew that I have to be a part of this, and GROW mentorship program was my key to get to know all of you. Through the mentorship, I am working with my mentor to build conceptual plans to find ways where I can use these great plans, big plans that are funded by great big funding projects, to find a way to filter them to local ordinances, so then when I try to do everyday work, I have the right tools to translate all the research and all those great management practices to everyday work that I do. So that is my goal, and that is why I am in the program. And thank you for having me, and I'm having so much fun at the same time.
Good, thank you. Yeah, we're really glad you're here. And I actually didn't even know that's how you were referred to the GROW mentorship program. So I'm excited to learn that. So my next question is for another resident of Chatham County, Randall Mathews, who has been a part of SCDRP also for many different stages. So maybe first you can share your connection with SCDRP, and also as extreme weather events intensify and federal funding remains uncertain, so in line with our theme for this meeting, what role do you think that SCDRP can play in bringing together emergency managers and resilience practitioners to foster more coordinated regional action?
Great question. There we go. I think we can just, perfect. Adapt and overcome, that's emergency management, y'all.
That's right, we just did it live.
That's right. So much like emergency management, I got involved by someone saying, like, hey, you should come check this out. So thank you, Jennifer Klein. You were my introduction to this. And that was so long ago. I had hair, not a lot of hair, but still some, okay? That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. But as we look at, the federal landscape changing, as emergency managers, we're all kind of nervous as to what has happened and what will happen. But at the end of the day, what hasn't changed is all disasters start local and end local. So no matter what changes happen at the federal level, we still have that responsibility. We've always had that responsibility. But utilizing the resources in this network is a tremendous resource for everyone. So as we look at our common goals, it doesn't matter if you're from academia, it doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit, local government, state government, federal government, all these different stakeholders that are here today, in some shape or form, we're all about serving the community and helping the community. So we all have that same mission, but we just achieve it in different methods. But we can utilize that expertise to help make sure that we can further our own efforts within our own communities. So with all these changes at the federal level, this gives us the opportunity to go through and rethink and reimagine how we go through and do business. And having these conversations, making these connections during meetings like this, during our monthly partnership meetings is incredibly, incredibly important. So making sure you can leverage that information, those networks, is incredibly valuable. For example, having people like Manuel LeBoy here, managing Puerto Rico's recovery after Hurricane Maria, like that's incredible expertise to tap into. So if I was a local emergency manager and I just got smacked with a huge hurricane, reaching out and talking to him might be a good idea to say, hey, what were some of the pitfalls that you ran into? So, finding out some of these different failures that we've experienced, as well as the accomplishments that we've achieved, is incredibly important. Emergency managers, we all do after-action reports. We want to hear the good and the bad, and make sure we're driving things forward. But being able to come to these different monthly partnership meetings where we highlight some of these different experiences from individuals, and then being willing to share what you have gone through is also incredibly important. So, having all these different programs, these different connections, this was referred to as like an incubator network. It's all about creating those connections and developing that, because you never know when you're going to need those different resources or need different expertise, and getting people plugged in with the data and how to leverage that data. People in this room make all that stuff come together. So leveraging that expertise is incredibly valuable, and you can't put a dollar figure on that.
Thank you, Randall. You've just wrapped and summed that up perfectly.